Welcome back to the Artistry Podcast. I am Jay, and this is Sev.
We will continue to talk about creative endeavors, and you'll find detailed information in the description down below if you're watching on YouTube, and on the episode description on Spotify. That stays in.
No problem. Today we'll speak about discipline and world building, in the context of a story. And as we discuss these topics, let us know in the comments what were your main obstacles in world building. Have you ever started a project without setting foundations? And do you know of any occasion where it worked? If you want a coherent story, it's important to establish a foundation. You need to build your world. To be effective in your endeavor, you will need discipline. Sev has a lot more to say in regards to world building. Today, I'll just chip in with my questions and go a little bit on discipline, I suppose.
I guess.
So I'll pass the mic to Sev, and he'll pretty much speak as
a paragon.
Give you a monologue.
As a paragon on world building. Well,
yes.
First of all, I'd just like to say that the main reason why I think you should be doing the discipline talk is I think you're much more focused about making things happening. I am a creature of whims, and I feel like most artists do have that mindset of, I don't feel like doing anything, so I'll just maybe tomorrow I'll have that burst. And even if you work really hard against that, there will always be a day. The fact that I took 8 years of world building is a statement that my discipline isn't that good, because I definitely could have reduced that time frame to about 1 year. But on the subject of world building, I do think that I have a lot to say on it. Mainly because, let me just open my document here. I wrote a big book. I wrote a big fantasy book, the Crystal Saga thingamajig. It's on Amazon. You can buy it if you want to. It's a very big book. It will take you a lot of time to read, so it's a good time sink. Otherwise, you can just use it to balance a table or something. Anyway.
Yeah, that has been proven on his video, by the way.
For
Sam
sure.
Made a very good video on how to use his book as construction material and some other uses you would not expect. Actually, you should take a look.
Yeah, we're probably going to put that on the description as well. I'll send you the link. But, on the concept of world building, and I'm speaking, this is more obviously for writing a story. I have a hard time applying this concept to any other art forms. But the idea really is for you to have a believable world for your characters to play in. Basically, you want to create a sandbox that eases your transition into the world, so that while you're writing, you don't immediately become blocked on the spot for trying to think of something weird and fantastical for any given moment. Like your character walks into a dungeon and suddenly you need to think what the dungeon means and what's the history of the dungeon, what yada yada yada. If you do world building beforehand, you know that the dungeon is located in a country, and that country had X history, that wars had occurred there. Maybe that dungeon used to be a tomb for the former kings that were lost in that war. And suddenly you start to, through the context of the world building, your character going inside that dungeon already has so much potential. That is the essence of world building, is that it gives you a lot of feedback, a lot of contextual clues that might not be relevant to the story, but are relevant to painting a landscape. Before I go further into the world building, I'd say that in terms of writing, there are two types of writers. And one of them focuses a lot more on world building than the other. The example is, I'm using this quote from George R. Martin, who explains this concept so much more eloquently than I do. But he says that there are two writers, the one that is a gardener and one that is an architect. And the gardener writer takes a seed of an idea. He plants it on the earth. He waters it with love and blood and sweat and tears, and he just watches the story grow. Like, I didn't expect it to twist and turn. It is affected by the elements, by the wind, by the moods. So basically, you know what the main plot is, but you don't know what it grows into, and that is the essence of a gardener writer. Is that everything feels more, it feels more vivid and more spontaneous because it is, because you're basically writing on a whim.
Hmm.
Obviously, when I say that a writer is a gardener or an architect, you're not just one or the other. It's like when you identify yourself with the archetype of a gardener, you don't just plant the seed and, well, let's just wing it from here. No, you have a few ideas of what you want to do. You know what you who your characters are. You know a bit of their backstory. You know that the idea you planted will eventually lead to something. But besides that, you're very, very vulnerable to, to outside influences. The
So
architect,
just
go
so
on.
just to be clear, when you mention that you have a basic idea of what the character is, you mean just in your head, right? You did not
Yeah.
actually set anything down.
Um, I believe that they do set some things down. Usually, they follow the hero's journey circle, where it's basically this young, uh, uh, now I don't remember exactly the wheel, but it's this young character that has this mentor that teaches him the ways of the world, but he's still very naive to it.
Mm.
He goes through a tragic moment that introduces him to the story, and and from that point on, most of the times the mentor dies, and he is forced to carry on the journey upon himself.
Mhm.
And
Right.
by the end of it, he goes through a full arc where he learned something new, he overcame something, and he changed as a character by the time he returns to his home state, to his village, to return to his family, etc. He
Mhm.
returns the better man, but a changed man. And that's the idea of the hero's journey. And basically, that archetype can apply to almost any character you make.
Well, to be fair, that sounds a little bit like people are kind of uh, reusing a basic foundation that was set by somebody for a formula that people noticed that works.
There is this idea that all the stories have already been told. There is no new stories to be told. No, I'm not even joking. It's like all the stories are in the telling. It is how you tell it. It's the details that
Mm,
you want to show. But the characters,
mhm,
the hero, the noble villain, the dark hero, all that shit has existed for longer than you can even believe. Before there was
mm,
writing, there was stories about that shit. So
I see.
it's very recycled, but it's about the details. It's about the magic of the world, in my opinion. That
Mhm,
really that captures the joy of the reader, the joy of the audience. It's like, oh, that is like Harry Potter. To
mhm.
me, Harry Potter, in terms of characters, are as bland as they fucking come. However, the magic behind it of, oh, even you, a kid underneath the staircase of unusually cruel aunts, even you can one day become this magical, sexy, rich Merlin thing. And it introduces a new world hidden beneath our own. And that whole idea was so magical that it captured a whole generation. Like my
Mhm,
generation, I remember growing up with these films and with these books, and everyone was goddamn shit batch crazy for it. Everyone had a
mm,
house,
mm,
everyone had whatever the thing that the Patronus, everyone had their colors, their brand, their everything. And that
mm.
is because the world building was so vivid and it was so in tune with the culture at the time.
Right.
And that's what you want to tell in your story, more so than the
Mm,
characters itself. Because Harry Potter, the dude is bland as shit.
mhm. I mean, when you talk about it, it kind of makes sense, right? He's doesn't have a lot of. I mean, the character does not have a lot of charisma, really. Like it doesn't feel like he has.
His
He's very.
charisma is
He's kind of
bravery.
predictable.
Yeah,
He's kind of
his
predictable.
charisma comes in his bravery. It's always, oh,
Hmm.
there's this dark scary thing. I wouldn't be able to take care of that dark scary thing, but god damn it, Harry Potter double believed in himself, and god gosh darn it, he did it
Mm.
for his friends. And that is
Yeah. Okay.
always, an honorable trait. It's always noble. But
Hmm.
that's as deep as it goes, in my opinion. I mean, you can
Hmm.
add a lot of depth to a lot of perceived depth by his parents, they died protecting him. Oh, he is prophesied to be attached around the villain, and yada yada yada. To me, that isn't so much character traits. That's just things that happen to him. A character trait is, if is he greedy? Is it because he was brought poor? Is he the sort of guy that kind of wants everything for himself, or because Harry
Right.
Potter actually doesn't care about any sort of material gains? And that is because, well, he's so poor that he doesn't see material gains as something worthwhile. If you have nothing, there's enough to go around, sort of thing. But
Yeah.
at the same time, that's incredibly boring. It'd be more interesting, perhaps, that he'd be kind of the scavenger character, like, oh, this thing that people find useless, I can make use out of it. Kind of like a Spider-Man character, like who is
Mhm.
brought poor in New York, and he makes gadgets out of anything from things he finds in a dumpster.
Mhm, mhm. Right. So just to, I apologize for derailing the conversation. Just to catch the listeners back into it, we were talking about different archetypes of writers, and one would be the gardener, which you touched
Yes.
upon, and the next one would be the architect.
The architect is one that I identify myself with the most, which is a person that before he writes the first word, before he needs to have the foundation of the house. He needs to know where the walls will go, where the sockets will go, where the doors will go, all that before he drives down the first nail. Basically, he needs to have the whole structure planned. And this, in my opinion, creates better narrative because
Mhm.
going back to the gardener one, if you spend a lot of time just going with the whims of the character, you create a lot of questions for the
Mhm.
reader that do not get answered. An example of that would be Lost, the TV show, or,
Mhm.
well, anything J.J. Abrams ever did in his life. He seems like a sort of guy that really enjoys presenting the questions, which is a very Gardner-esque trait, but
Mhm.
he's not so interested in exploring them. And this leads to very
Mhm.
frustrating moments for the reader, where you see this sort of like this sort of Chekhov's gun, where something very important seems to be highlighted, and you think, oh, this will culminate into this masterpiece Rubik's cube, where everything will slot in together, and it'll be this magical storytelling. And it just turns out it was a gun. It was just a random gun that someone
Mhm.
dropped there, and that is so infuriating. People say they can claim that that is, what is that thing that the
Mhm.
is it's whatever. It's going against the tide, going against the what is expected,
Mhm.
but it's just lazy writing, in my opinion, and that happens a lot in the gardener's perspective. The architect,
Mhm.
kind of the opposite happens because you have everything so laid down, everything so structured, everything so coherent. The characters are almost wooden; they're forced into those shapes.
Mhm.
It's very hard to be organic and spontaneous when you have a plot and a deadline to get there. We ain't kidding. We got
Mhm.
time to go. By chapter 3, you need to be a hero, boy. So we ain't got time to dilly dally.
Mhm.
And that forces a lot of things to happen, which sometimes can seem very unnatural. The
Mhm.
ideal thing is for a writer to try and include, to be mindful of these two traits as they write, as they world build.
Mhm.
And this is the point now, after I made this introduction, saying that I am more of an architect. You can see that world building was very important to me, and I spent a
Right.
lot of time making maps. Then, after I made the map, I needed to make the countries and the cities each country had. And because I'm actually kind of a geography nerd, I also wanted
Mhm.
to make the rivers, the outlines, the lakes, the mountains,
Mhm.
and I wanted to make it so that each country had its own districts, had its own regions,
Oh, you
and
went into administration. Mm.
yeah, then I went even further to that, and I went into administration, to religion, to culture.
Mhm.
I've actually felt that I didn't go deep enough into architecture because each
Mhm.
civilization has its own architecture, which I find
Mhm.
really interesting. And in this book, after I finished the book, I sort of realized everyone seems like they're living in medieval Europe, and
Mhm.
there's not enough in the ways of building from all kinds of stone, from marble to just river rocks to
Mhm.
anything. And you also, the roofs are always like these tiled triangle roofs. Some of them should
Mhm.
just be like huts or have square tops, and because the region doesn't have enough rain, so the square top should each time it rained would harness it into a tiny little pool. All that shit is world building, and that adds
Mhm.
to the believability of the world and to the story. And I love, and I spend so much time on it, so much ridiculous
Mhm.
time that before I even started writing, I started exploring history to lengths that are ridiculous. I went to, okay, so I know this. This starts kind of like the section. Imagine in the real world where
Hmm.
the the medieval world was transitioning into an industrious age. I wanted to capture that moment in my book. So I
Hmm.
wanted to explore all the medieval age. I went to the Renaissance, I went to the Knights, I went to the Dark Ages, and I went to the Caveman ages, and I was starting to realize I'm going too far. I was world
Hmm.
building too much.
Right, right.
And
I mean, yeah, go
now
on.
continue. You have a good question
Yeah,
coming up.
I was just gonna say we should at some point ask you the question, like, when did you decide it was good enough?
Essentially, when the world building stopped being something that I thought would help me and started becoming something that I felt like it was just delaying the inevitable. It was just
Hmm.
postponing the deadline for the starting date. And I
Hmm.
reached a point where I realized the stupidity of writing down so many things that weren't never going to be in the story. And I felt like I was comfortable enough. And I guess anyone has to judge for themselves what's the best point for them to feel comfortable.
Hmm.
You can just write 2 paragraphs of world building, go like, you know what, I get the gist, let's go. Or you can be like me and spend 8 years doing this bullshit. And after that, you realize, you know what, I think I might just finally understand what this is about. And
Yeah.
you start. Now, one very important thing to I want to conclude with, and before I let you do your big monologue,
Mm.
is that just because you start writing the story does not mean that the world building is over. Just
Mm.
because you started, something, started the concrete, tangible product that you want to sell, does not mean that you can't go back and either add more to things that were lacking
Hmm.
or fix things that were wrong. I'll give you 2 examples. One of them already gave actually, which is that after I wrote the book, looked back and realized that I didn't explore architecture enough, and I think that would be a
Hmm.
really good trait to contextually explain what the races and civilizations are. And I made better efforts to fix that on the upcoming books. The other thing is, I was writing the story, and I had this main character who is this leader, this Civil War revolutionary, and he's relatively young by the time the story starts. And I was
Oh, I love this.
yeah, and I was kind of this was kind of bugging my head because by the time the story starts, he is this imposing, massive character who has this backstory of wars, this curriculum of wars, and there's this very prominent war in the past that changed the landscape. And I did basic math, and I realized that this titan of warfare was leading a war when he was 5 years old.
I love this bit.
I created a civil war revolutionarily toddler,
uh,
and that, I mean, obviously it's an easy thing to fix. I changed the ages a bit, but that gave me the presence of mind to do that for all my characters. Suddenly, I made a chronology of how old everyone was at each given moment, and that was immensely important. In fact, I like to say the most important things to do in world building are making a map so that you know where things are, making a chronology so you know when things happened, and just having a general understanding of history, so that
Mhm.
you know how the alliances and relationships work, so that you just don't create something out of the convenience of the story, and you create something more believable to the world
Mhm.
setting that you created.
Mhm. Right. I just want to kind of add a little bit, sort of back to the plugin. I mean, I think you should, anyone's listening, you can see how much, what has taken of Sev to make this book, to write his first book. And I think that gives a little bit of credibility. Also, because I personally enjoy story as exploration. So I am somebody, I'm not talking about books, just any story, a game, a TV show, a movie, a book, any story. I enjoy it from a point of view of exploring, discovering. So I really hate spoilers. Like, I don't care if it's a small detail. I don't even want it to be on my radar. I don't want to even think about or the opposite situation. I don't even want to think about it, because for me, the enjoyment of a story is discovery and exploration. And And another thing that really bothers me is lack of coherence. And I think world building is essential to
Oh,
have a
very
coherent
true.
story. Otherwise, you have viewers or listeners or readers then come to a point like, huh? That doesn't make any sense. That is what did the writer just pull this out of his ass or her ass? What? How did this happen? And I hate that moment. And I know a lot of TV shows that have that. At least I don't read a lot of books, and but TV shows, I'm not sure if that is because they are adapted works from something else, and perhaps they have to take shortcuts. They have to convey certain ideas in a certain period of time. They have stricter deadlines. They have a certain amount of episodes, and
And
so on.
again, the example of that would be Lost. Like I said earlier, it's a show that started with all these questions, and because of deadlines, but actually it was because they had too many episodes to fill out. They just kind of
Mm,
droned on and on and on, and they created a
mm,
thing where the loopholes started appearing. And because they had to do more episodes, they didn't have time to address it. You just had to create more and more.
right. Yeah, so personally, I never watched Lost, but yeah, I can definitely relate it. I mean, I think a pain on a lot of people's chests would be the final season of Game of Thrones,
Oh yeah.
and I mean, personally, for me, that happened. I just kind of, my when I saw that, my eyebrows lifted.
Mhm.
I was like, "Well, that's shit," and I just vowed to not think about it again, because just move on with my life. Because honestly, it was just meh. It was disappointing. And over time, I like before when I started a show, I would make a point of it to finish it if I
Yeah.
enjoyed it at least a little bit. Nowadays, so maybe I would stop at a pilot or something, or the first or second episode. But if I went a little further, I would make it a point to finish it. But nowadays, if I feel like there is no coherence, I just drop it,
Give up.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just yeah, because there's no point.
I feel like I'm the same way, to be honest. I
Mm.
think that I'm like, even if a show starts going sour, if I start like one season, I'm finishing the whole goddamn thing. But
Mhm.
maybe because I'm also getting older, I'm doing this less and less, and I'm being a lot more picky with the shows that I start watching. Do you know
Right.
those superhero series like Flash, Arrow, and all that shit?
Yep.
Like, I
Mm.
started recently watching Superman,
Mhm.
and I used to watch. I watched like one or two seasons of Flash. It was okay. I watched 4 seasons of Arrow, and
Mhm.
I realized it was all soap opera superheroes, but I kind of dig it and whatever, and I had time. Now I was watching Superman, which is basically the same thing, Superman and Lois, and
Mhm.
I realized, oh, this is just the same goddamn thing. I immediately stopped watching it. I gave it 3 episodes. It didn't catch my interest. I saw the formula there. I was like, you know what? Good for you. I just gave up. I don't have the time for that shit anymore.
Mhm. I guess we're just taking this time to a little derail a bit
Yeah, yeah,
again,
yeah, yeah.
but I want to say, like, I started watching a TV show recently, so I watch like 1 or 2 episodes a day. That's like that's my time off. I guess I'm still at home most of the time because of the COVID pandemic, so that's what I found to kind of sit back and just relax and enjoy something else, being passive for a moment,
What did
which
you
is
watch?
the 100. The TV show is the 100, and
Never
the
saw that.
and I have a very conflicting opinion about it. I think there's a lot of lousy writing incoherence in the book, and some plot twists are kind of shittily done.
In the
But I
book? It's a
think the
book?
no, I'm watching the TV show.
Oh, you said in the book.
I don't know. Sorry, I meant the TV show. And but the thing is, I find that the overall story, overall, like, how where it's going, it's very solid, but then the episodes themselves and like the weird character, they're so fickle, they're so inconsistent, and it really bothers me. I'm so conflicted, but
For my
I'm still
benefit,
watching
can
it.
you give me a
Hmm?
very quick summary of what the 100 is?
Oh, that's okay. I think it's a bit difficult because it's 7 seasons and I'm only on the second season, and it changes quite a bit,
What's the
and it
premise of
would be
the?
hard. Okay, premise is there are a bunch of people in space and they're running out of oxygen. They got to make decisions to address this. One decision they make is send a few people down to Earth, which has been it's post-apocalyptic. It's been destroyed. It's radioactive. That's why they're in the space in the first place, because Earth is not survivable. And so they decide, okay, well, maybe after 100 years or so is okay now, and we'll just they send like prisoners down there and like, oh, look, if you survive, you survive, if you don't, you don't, but we got to save oxygen on the
Mhm.
space station. And that's kind of how it kicks off. And
That is a
I don't think it
great
would be
start.
fair to give more information without spoiling stuff
Yeah, that's a
again.
great start. That makes me want to watch because I'm a
Dude,
big sucker for sci-fi.
And dude, I think the overall story, it's so good, it's so solid, and you can at least, I think, again, this is adapted from a book. I don't know how the book looks like, but it feels like the writer had a good idea where the story was going. Like through the discovery, the exploration, you kind of see, this looks like, yeah, this is good, man, this is good stuff. But then there's a few episodes just really bothers me. I really wanted to stop watching it at some points, but it just kept me in just because of the overall story.
Without
And it has a
spoiling,
very
was it without spoiling? Was it the characters that kind of irked you? Like they were doing things that didn't make much sense?
yeah, there was specifically characters that were too fickle. They did not seem like consistent.
Yeah, I
They were
hate
not
that shit.
consistent. Just because it felt like it served a specific purpose within the story, right? They
Mm.
forced, as you say, perhaps maybe it was too much of an architect move. It
Yeah, yeah.
didn't feel organic. It did not feel organic. It just felt like they pushed them in that direction because that's what the story needed.
Mhm.
And yeah, and some plot twists were just, they felt a little bit forced or over dramatic, perhaps not forced, but over dramatic, just because
Yeah.
they wanted to shock you, you know,
Yeah, I
like
get it.
watch me.
That
And
was similar to Game of Thrones. Because adapting is something from a book to a TV series, you obviously have to cut corners and you have to summarize a lot of plots. And obviously, what
mhm.
happened almost for sure is like the last season of Game of Thrones is they needed to get from point A to point B, but they didn't have a book to get there, so they just pushed the motherfucker down a hill until he got there. So
Mm.
a character went through 8 books of of personal growth in about 1 hour of TV screen time.
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, that's also very important, pacing, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't feel the pacing, it just feels forced. And again, I wouldn't know if that's because of the TV show or that was adapted from the book, or if the book originally had those issues. But yeah, I'm still watching it just because I think the overall story is good, and there's like a few characters that are actually, even though they still have those inconsistencies, they're actually quite interesting. I mean, that you're drawn to them. I think they're quite. They make tough decisions, and they matter. They feel like there is some consequence to them. So I think that's important. In a lot of stories, you're just like, oh, I just did it because I could, or whatever. It doesn't feel like there is an impact, and in this case, the decisions that characters make do have an impact, even when it is inconsistent with their kind of belief system or whatever. Because some are just sloppy. Like, honestly, it's just sloppy. Like, you have a character that has a primitive, a prime, like, directive. This is the reason, their raison d'être, right? And then they go completely against it, and like, even if it's not obvious, like, dude, that's completely opposite of what you've been doing all this time. It's like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? And but yeah, anyway.
Oh man,
And
there was a word for that shit that I completely forgot earlier. You know that it's like counterculture, counterintuitive. What's it called? Like when they're doing
oh
something just for the sake of shock value, doing something just
oh
to be surprised, just to surprise you.
I I'm not sure if this is what you mean. There is one which is writing what technique, which is when you're at an impasse and you have nothing else to go on to. That would be Deus Ex Machina, but I don't
No,
think that's what you
yeah,
mean.
yeah, no, I don't. Actually, that is something that is worth talking about. But that's not what I meant. Like the Game of Thrones guys they were quoted for doing this stupid thing because they wanted to do the unexpected. You see one of the episodes conclude where one of the main characters kills someone that didn't
Hmm.
seem like she deserved it.
Hmm.
That was like there was a whole arc with other characters that made them the ones that should be facing the villain, but they just included this character out of nowhere for the sake of being spontaneous and random to be something
Hmm.
that the audience couldn't predict.
Hmm.
And that shit I hate. But yeah, that sort of thing it really irks me when they're trying to do something for the sake of being uh count. Oh man, what's the fucking word? This is gonna kill me. Doesn't
Well,
matter.
I hope you get it back by the next
Episode.
podcast. Yeah.
But there is something to be said, maybe in the future episode, for future episodes of this podcast about building drama and pacing, because there is
Hmm.
like there a book needs to have boring parts. You need to have
Hmm.
moments where there's no action, where just people talking, or maybe just scenery, and you get a little bit of the political landscape or something like that. Something that isn't necessarily drama, sex, or violence.
Mm-hmm. Right. You need to have a flow, right? An ebb. Yeah, you need to have ups and downs, right?
Yeah,
Just
a roller. Yeah,
emotionally.
it's like a roller coaster can't be just a climax nonstop. You need to go.
Right.
You need to have the buildups. That is very
Mm-hmm.
important in a story, and a lot of properties, not just in books, because actually books they do it well. The art of reading makes it so that you take time to reach to the end of the book. But in
Mm.
watching series, watching movies, watching basically just those two, there is so much rush to get to the end. I don't know if you're a big comic book movie buff, but that's the
Mm.
comparison between a Marvel and a DC. Immediately,
Oh.
as Marvel took its time to build the characters. Even you can even see the formula of each movie, but it works
Mm-hmm.
because they earn it. While DC, because they started kind of haphazardly, they needed to rush to get to the same point, and it just fucking bombed. And the quality of the movies, to be honest, are pretty much on par. Just because
Right.
one was rushed, it immediately alienated the audience.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I barely watch any stuff of DC because I just feel they're boring, and Marvel movies, even when I feel like the story is kind of meh, I find that at least the characters are funny or entertaining enough to make it worth my time. Whereas DC, I watched that one movie. What was it, the Aquaman or whatever? Dude, I don't remember anything. It's just so bland and yeah, I don't remember what the story was about. I don't care. I just remember that one joke about the guy like having the chain up his ass and he was being honest and it was funny. That's the only thing I remember
Mm,
from the whole
very
story.
good.
That's all. That's all.
But yeah, but there is something to say that perhaps one of the reasons why the most boring Marvel movies don't bomb is because that they're kind of world building as well. They're adding to this huge universe. Like the worst
Mm.
Marvel movie has something to say. I think the worst Marvel movie is Thor Into the Dark World, where he's fighting dark. I'm pretty sure you don't remember that one.
No, I know the name. I'm like, which one is that? I'm googling it right now. Which one is that?
It's one where Thor is basically fighting pale elf dude and the dark
Uh,
elves, and Natalie Portman gets imbued with one of the Infinity Stones. And there you go.
oh.
That's where one of the Infinity Stones was introduced. That shit is
Mm.
that shit.
Oh,
It adds something to the Marvel universe. The movie's not good,
right.
but it's not bad because it's part of the texture of the pattern of this world. So it taking time to build stuff pays off, even if it's just to create a world. Sometimes you just don't want just to tell a story. You want to create a playground for people to imagine themselves being in. Again,
Hmm.
I spoke about Harry Potter being in a prime example of this. We got Game of Thrones. People don't want to be in that world, but the houses, the sigils, the history, all that has so much allure. And
Hmm.
the big bad boy of them all, the Kingpin franchise that created all this shit, Lord of the Rings, is a prime example of creating a world that you just want to go visit. Hobbiton, the little
Hmm.
round houses on the hills, the
Mm. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
the Minas Tirith, the Gondor, all that shit is just beautiful landscape. New Zealand gained a whole new commercial avenue just because
Right.
out of tourism, just because of those movies. And
Mm.
it's the power of the franchise is so much stronger if you have a beautiful world that people want to explore.
Yeah, a little something for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Because there are different interests for different kinds of people. Yeah, I definitely think that world building is, or at least having a world that is interesting, is essential for a story. Or at least for somebody like me, who again likes to explore and discover. And if there is no such thing, then I mean, what is there to explore? I mean, what, just the characters?
One
Not
last
so
thing I want
much.
to say before we jump into the discipline
Hmm.
area is that this world building is also a huge clutch for a writer. It really helps you to avoid getting into dead ends. I
Hmm.
realized some of my characters, throwing out their story, I know what I want to do with my main characters, but I eventually created a lot of secondary characters that grew in the story just because they were goddamn cool. An example of
Hmm.
that for you who
Oh,
read the book is Marin, one of the overlords of Namur, the old guy with the
right.
seven
Oh, yeah,
horns.
yeah.
that character, like, he was just introduced as this talking point for Gyros in one of the first chapters of the book. Like, he was to be the exposition that says, "So we're going to invade, right?" And they have a conversation about that. But
Spoiler alert.
yeah, well, it's first chapters of the book.
Okay.
But because the character had this very austere look, his whole the whole city around him was basically bland, without decoration, though there was only one sculpture, and he's a very religious man. He's very old, and he's known to be a berserker, a rageful character, full of anger and just this war hound. But he's presented as a very pragmatic old man who seems kind of small even and frail. But Gyros, who's this giant of a character, is kind of afraid of going into battle with him. And all that world building really made me fall in love with this secondary character. And he appears a lot more in the book just because I found him interesting and I wanted to play with him more. And that is through world building, that you have these characters that grow in prominence just because the things that you associated with them kind of made you like them more.
Yeah, I agree. And I noticed, yeah, again, I did read the book, obviously. That is how we got together. And the character is interesting. For me, it is not the most interesting character, but I do believe he's interesting. As you said, he is distinct, right? He's not like any other character. And uniqueness does help to bring someone out.
I feel like the most interesting characters, obviously the big boys, the main antagonists or protagonists, the title characters. But I like, as far as secondary characters go, I feel like Marin is probably the character who doesn't have a chapter, who stands out the most for me, because of the world building thing.
Yeah, I mean, we can go into every character. I don't know. Maybe one day we'll do a podcast on the book
if people
itself,
are interested.
If somebody's interested, because you got to read the book to be into. Otherwise, it's just going to be full of spoilers, right?
Yeah, just saying random names and random stuff very vaguely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be very interesting for both of us to discuss it, and but if people don't know what we're talking about, it's just it's beyond the point, the point of a podcast. But moving on to some discipline, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, let's start with the mindset and attitude, right? When we were talking about world building and such, but before even getting to that, perhaps you should decide how long it's going to be, what it is that you're going to do, and set up a time or a schedule, right? Something for you to do regularly. Habits are helpful. We're creatures of habit. I mean, just an example. One thing that I found myself very stressed younger, because I think it's very important to keep my promises to people. I try to be a person of my word, and if I schedule something with somebody, set a date and a time, I would feel very stressed, fearing I would forget it. So I would all the time I was like, oh, I got to do this on Tuesday, like next week. I have to do that on Wednesday next week. I never bothered to write anything down. And nowadays I don't know why no one ever taught me that. It's just kind of frustrating. But at some point I think maybe because Google Calendar became a thing, I did not like to write things down on paper. Mm-hmm. And with Google Calendar, the only thing I do is just at the end of the day, I just look at my calendar and see what's coming. I don't need to stress over it anymore. And so I exchanged a lot of mental energy, whereas I was actively trying to remember something. I exchanged it for a very easy habit, which is just once a day, look at my calendar.
Yeah.
So I think you save a lot of energy if you create a simple habit. For anything, really. This applies to anything, right? And we talked a little bit about that on last podcast.
Before we go, I want you to remember where you are in your topic, because you touched on something that it's so important, which is to keep your promises of time and shit. If you have a meeting, you go to that meeting at that time. I can't tell you how often, and this happens in so many aspects of my life, where we plan something. Okay, at 4 p.m. we have a meeting. And then at 4 p.m. I'm there and no one else is. And then you wait 30 minutes for the first person to show up. And then we're just finishing. Oh, I forgot. Or we're just finishing your lunch or whatever. And the meeting starts at like 5:30. I just spent an hour and a half just ruined, just wasted, just looking at a screen. And that shit is important in everything. If you're going out at night and you made a meeting point at 10 p.m. At City Square, and then at 10 p.m. you're the only one there, that shit busts my goddamn balls. I hate that those motherfuckers. You have to value your time a lot.
Hmm.
Part of this discipline, this is a point I wanted to go into, is that discipline is all about how to be efficient with your time. And if you are
Hmm.
with someone who doesn't respect your time, that's not a good partner to have at
Right.
all. Continue, please.
Yeah. So yeah, on that point, just briefly, I mean, perhaps if your issue is remembering, then the one thing you could do is just develop a simple habit of writing things down and then looking over your calendar. I mean, if your issue is you just don't care, that's something else, right? So yeah, like before even getting the world building, getting you should have some basic idea what you want to do, when you want to do it, and set up a realistic time, right? I think that's perhaps is the most difficult thing, because we're very ambitious, like, oh, I want to do this by next month, I'm done, I'm going to be done with my 5 chapters,
Oh,
I'm
sweet
going to do
summer
this and do
child.
that. And you need to be realistic, but the issue is that realistic expectations come from experience. So when you set the plan, you have to understand that the plan is not what you're going to do, but it's a guideline to what you will try to do. And then you have to adjust that as you go, so that you have a more realistic expectations, and then your plans and expectations will be much more closely connected. So this is a slow process, correct? And well, the mindset is that don't stress over it, because you might at some point, but over time you'll understand that the goals that you set were not realistic, and that's a very important thing to understand for yourself. I think for me it was very difficult to understand. I set a lot of unrealistic expectations for myself, and what would happen is I would just give up, and that is the wrong attitude to have.
Yeah.
And
Though both of them are the wrong attitude to have. If you if you think that you want to reach the top of Mount Everest but don't think how to get there, you're gonna get frustrated after you wasted all the money trying going to Nepal and realizing, fuck, I didn't bring any mountain gear. The whole process of it needs to be calculated through very boring means, calendars, Excel sheets,
yeah.
just having notes or lists, all that shit which is artistically boring is essential in any sort of building endeavor, whatever you're creating.
Mhm. In regards to that, you mentioned that it is boring. I found that it was very boring for me, but I take a lot of pleasure in it now. And I mean, I don't know if this can be transferable to other people, but the pleasure for me is just, as I said, like now, instead of stressing over things, all I do is just I do two things. First, if something comes to my mind, I want to do something, or if I'm speaking to you, like, oh, we got to do this on this day, I just take a note. That's the one thing I do, right? This is a habit I developed. I write the thing right away. The paper or the computer is a much better memory than your own memory for things like this. Your brain is made for complex problems, not for remembering stupid facts. Or simple facts, not stupid, simple facts. And the other thing I do is just I've developed a habit of looking at my phone or whatever, at my calendar every day at the end of the day or something. Or on the weekend maybe I'm more distracted. I'll take a look for the whole week just to get an idea what's coming. And it's such a huge relief. I remember how stressed I was before. It's such a huge relief. So for me, it's a pleasure coming from that um, difference of approach.
My girlfriend does something very similar, and it's not in an artistic sort of way. She's a very organized person, and each night she plans her clothes for the next day, her meal,
Hmm.
and basically she has a to-do list of what she needs to do, obviously. And she does that
Hmm.
always on the day before. And now always at night before going to bed, she double checks to see if everything is ready. And
Hmm.
so that by the morning time, she's on autopilot, and she just kind of gets up, puts clothes, goes to work, and
Right.
does things. And that is, I feel like it's a huge time. I personally don't do that myself, but I look at what she does, and it's something that is worthy to imitate.
Yeah, and I think the biggest take of that is not the time that you save, but the relief of stress that you have,
Yeah, the
because as you
anxiety
said,
is released.
yeah, yeah, exactly, because you have it down. you're not gonna have nightmares about it, as we all have at some point in our lives, about some test or some job interview, whatever it is that you had to do. I'm sure you've been stressed about it, and not all of
Mm.
those anxieties can be taken away through writing things down, but a lot of them can. And I think that that is very important if you want to do anything that is considerably sizable, right? Any project you want to take on that is sizable enough, it will justify doing this.
That's the whole idea of breaking things down to small blocks
Hmm.
so that the
Right.
task of building something big doesn't seem as daunting.
Hmm. And that leads very well into the next point, which is doing the dirty work. And once you set these things for yourself, once you scheduled or whatever the way you made things work for you, you got to get there at the time you decided, and you got to get it done, right? No matter how boring it is. So I think the important thing here is try to start small. If this is something you have never done and you're not aware of what is a realistic thing to do, just do the smallest thing that you can. I mean, the dumbest thing, like, if you want to fill your bathtub with bath water and you're out of water, but you got to do it in your building or whatever. I don't know, this is a silly example. Just decide, tomorrow I'm just going to fill the bucket. Don't even take it to the bathtub. This is a very silly example, but do the thing that you can definitely do no matter what. Like, no matter what happens, maybe you're going to have a, I don't know, maybe you're going to trip on the way and, break your arm. You can still do it at the end of the day. You can still do that thing. Like, think for failure as well, like unexpected. You need to save some time for things that don't work. And there is a very good expression. Let me see if I get this right. Yeah, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right?
Ooh, deep.
um, yeah, it's a very interesting, well, quote that I think applies very well. You just have to get something very simple, something very realistic, and, well, again, that is something you get with experience. But so start small, anything small.
I would like to use this moment
Hmm.
because there is so much you can say about this doing the dirty work that I feel like you've already said on another podcast that you've done recently. Like
Hmm.
your life, I didn't know this shit about you until I saw that podcast, and it was deeply fascinating how,
Hmm.
I'd say, bold, because not many people do this, you were in traveling to exotic places where you barely spoke the language. And
Hmm.
you didn't do, like, you didn't go there with promises of great work. You just went there because you wanted to. And
Hmm.
through, grit and determination, you survived there, and I'd even say prospered there. And you did a lot of dirty work. And
Hmm.
if you, like, there's this podcast you do called the Rona Rants with Bags,
Yep.
and it
We'll plug it in.
was, yeah, do plug it in. It's a very, very interesting, it's more personal, it's not so much about artistry, but it is a really good insight into this step that you're talking about, and to you as a person.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had fun doing that one as well. And Bags perhaps is, in some way, is a small inspiration to get this podcast going, because there was, at least from my perspective, there was a little bit of an anxiety because I don't have any technical knowledge of recording, editing, any of that. And I said, well, he can do it, and he's doing it alone. So why can't the two of us do it? And so he was a little bit of an inspiration for this. And again, this is sidetracking again, but I think I'm curious to know what he thinks about this. But I know in the past, like a year or so ago, we kind of bounced off each other indirectly by I started like a small vlog, then he started a vlog, and then we both stopped them, and then he started a podcast, and now we're doing a podcast. So I think there was a little bit, for me, there was definitely an influence there. Like, oh, dude, he can do it, I can do it. Why am I not doing it?
He has a very good personality for it as well.
Yeah.
To again plug his podcast, he has this sort of interviewer quality to him, and he's quite good at, just letting the other person talk and asking questions that drives the conversation forward. It's very interesting podcast.
And a very smooth voice, right? It's like very,
Oh yeah,
very
the
calm.
silkiest. It's like honey in my
Mm.
ears.
Yeah, we'll definitely plug it in. You can see it in the comments for Rona Rants. Now I got a little lost there.
I'm so sorry, but I really wanted to talk
That's
about, you
fine.
were
Yeah,
talking
that's
about doing
fine.
the dirty work.
Doing the dirty work, and I had some point, but it's fine. Yeah,
I
I
fucked
guess we
you
can
over,
just move.
boy.
No issue, no issue. We can just move on. And another thing is review and refine, which is something we touched upon a little bit regarding your plan, right? You need to understand what is a realistic expectation, and you need to manage those. So the thing you do, again, the plan is not what you will do. The plan is just a guideline for what you want to do, and you have to
Yeah,
adjust it. So you said tomorrow I'm going to fill the bucket of water, and you get there like, oh damn it, I didn't know that actually this tap doesn't have that much water in it. There is an issue. I can only
the
fill
pressure is
half a bucket
shit.
a day. I can only fill half a bucket a day. So, then you gotta change your plan. You gotta take a look back and you gotta change it. And you adjust it, and then your expectations will be much closer with your plans. And that will be you will find some satisfaction in that. And now I do remember what I wanted to say, which is, yeah, the satisfaction thing about having the plans and expectations meet. It's just I was watching some video, and I will not be able to link this because I don't remember where I watched it, about a guy on how to stay motivated, or how to feel happy with what you do. And one thing is, you got after you do something that you decided you would do. So let's say tomorrow I'm going to buy 5 pens because I need to write my book, right? And when you do, you made a plan, and when you do that, after you do that, you need to have a small celebration for yourself. So what he suggested is you just have a little dance, just like a 3 second dance. Just you get a jiggle. Woohoo! I did it. I did what I decided. And that actually, if you do that as a habit, you'll find that it is actually very satisfying. You induce a certain psychological satisfaction that perhaps you would not get because you would dismiss it as a small thing. And it is a small thing, but you decided to do it, and now you did it. And you need to remind yourself that this is worthwhile.
That happens a lot in list making. Like if you have a list, just the thought of scratching something off your list is incredibly it's rewarding. It releases a lot of
Oh,
endorphins.
really? I didn't find that for lists. What I do personally is I actually physically, I don't do this all the time, but if something was like, I need a boost, I'm just kind of feeling down on this thing that I'm doing, I literally just take my right hand and pat my left shoulder, and then I take my left hand and pat my right shoulder, and I just,
Oh,
inside I just say like, good job, you did a good job. And
that
actually, I'm
that
doing this
phrase was
right
going
now as
somewhere.
I'm talking. Sorry.
The way you were phrasing that, I was worried it was going to somewhere completely different. I say, if I'm feeling a bit down, I just pick up my right hand and I pat my
And pat
shoulder.
my shoulder. Yeah, I didn't even. Wow, I'm glad this is going to be a really not for kids joke. I didn't even
No,
realize I made
no,
one.
it was fine. I didn't say anything. It's obviously for patting your shoulder.
Great. This is a double speak, right? You
What
speak to
else? What else
children
would you
and to
use your right
adults.
hand for?
Of course, of course.
To pat your
And
shoulder. I use my
but I
right
just want
hand
to
to
say,
pet your shoulder too.
and I just want to say that this habit has had such a Pavlovian uh, effect on me that now, as I spoke about it and as I did it, I already feel happy just for patting myself on the shoulder. I have Pavloved myself. Like I've created a reaction to a certain action. But I think it is important because it depends what kind of person you are. Some people have more difficulty staying motivated than others, but it is important to celebrate small
Wins.
victories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And some people, I was such a person that would always kick myself down when something bad happened, but I would never celebrate something good. This is a very bad thing. So you got to
Yeah,
do.
that helps. That happens a lot with me as well. You said the review and refine idea, which comes in later, and it happens a lot that when you're doing a drawing, you take yourself down with every mistake, but you don't give yourself that pat on the shoulder when you finish the drawing and it actually turns out really well. it,
Mhm.
there happens this thing happens, and I think it happens everywhere, not just in drawing, where the longer you look at your project, the longer you look at your work, the less you feel like it has value, the more it
Mhm. Mhm.
devalues. You start to realize, oh, this is kind of shit, and you start to see all the flaws more than all the progress. And by the end,
Mhm.
you hate it. You hate everything you do. That happens a lot in art, and
Yeah.
pretty sure you can relate with that.
Oh, I'm already thinking about something. I mean, specifically about editing our first episode and the teaser for the episode, which, by the way, has been out for on the 13th of June. But I will get into how to deal with that, which is And oh, sorry, I'll go back a little bit. So again, on looking at something and then just feeling like it's worthless, dismissing it, right? Regarding that, I've had that with our work, but I'm very satisfied because I actually feel like I planned this out very well, because I planned for things going wrong. I pushed with Sev that I want to delay this. He wanted to do these things faster, and I pushed it. Personally, I don't feel that I can do it within that time, because I need time to like forget about it. And this happened. There were a few days I just didn't want to look at it. And then after, this was like last weekend, and after the weekend I came back and I was happy. I was looking at the things again, and I was smiling, I was laughing at my own jokes, and it was very satisfying. But for 3 days I just didn't want to look at it. But I planned it so that I did have that time. And we had a little bit of an unpredicted like technical issue, and we had to refine it. And the day that it happened, I just dropped it. I just I made notes for you myself for the next day. And then the next day I didn't actually do it. I had some other stuff, and then the day after that I did it. And it is very satisfying for me, the fact that I set enough time for these things.
To
And
solve the
when I
problem.
looked at it, yeah. And then when I did actually do the issues, I did not feel rushed. I did not feel stressed. There was a little bit of pressure because it was barely before the deadline, but I felt I had enough time, so I was very happy with that. And again, the pat on the back, double pat, it's very satisfying. But this is not something I would have been able to do when I was younger. This is something, I learned over time. You need to experience it. If you don't do it, I don't think you'll feel the value of it. So hopefully, at least one listener or another will, in like 3 years, oh, by the way, I remember that podcast you did. You know what I mean? Oh, sorry, I just need a sip of water. I'll
Go
get
ahead.
out for a bit.
I'll just give a slight tangent here, very quick, to say, if you're working as a team, Jay is the one who's doing most of the heavy lifting here. But I like to give in with my thoughts, and because I'm a designer by profession, I know the technical things better, and it helps a lot to never belittle or reduce or destroy the work of your colleague. Like I always try to speak with Jay in terms of this thing here. This is I see what you're doing here, but in terms of technicality, perhaps do this, perhaps do that. And I'm always want to improve on what he has created, and he has created a lot of good stuff. I was going to say shit, but I don't want to. Again, it's good stuff. And to see the progress is like, it's proud. It's like a dad watching his child take his first steps, and in doing so, you always need to be a positive member to a team, because it's very easy to say, God, those colors, that background, God, what have I gotten myself into? No, you have to always be a positive influence in whatever endeavor you're doing.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, not just positive. I mean, the key word, and I think it's very common, is constructive, right? The
Sure.
feedback must be constructive. It has to lead the work into a better result, but without putting the other person down. So that's what's constructive is about.
That's the last part, without putting the other person down. Because I learned this passively when I first came to Porto, the city I live in, and I work in a national newspaper, and I have a boss there who is absolutely amazing. He's a person that values my opinion, and it would be very easy for a person to say, don't do this because it's bad. That's also constructive. It is constructive to say A, B, and C are the wrong answers. But it is better to say that perhaps the answer is beyond C. You know what I'm saying? It's better to say what is positive about your work and build upon it than to say what you've done wrong, or should I say, just to highlight what you've done wrong. Especially in a work office environment, I realize it's very easy for people to point and blame and to push blame onto others. And when you have someone who doesn't mind getting blamed and says, okay, you know what? You did something bad, but it was my fault because I didn't explain it well. My boss did that a lot. And that just takes the burden off of your shoulders. And it just builds upon you. It's just like, okay, I should have explained myself better. I could have done, I should have said this, and that. And it would have aimed you to where we both wanted to go. Communication is always key in refining and collaborative works.
I mean, I feel like always getting like thoughts stray away from the main topic, but
That's what I
on
do
that
best.
point of people of on that point of people such as your boss uh, taking the burden onto himself. One thing I this is my belief. You don't have to agree with me. I mean, you, the listener, not you, Sev, specifically. uh, I believe that people treat others the same way they think about themselves. And I noticed this from myself because I used to be a very negatively dismissive person of myself and of others. So I could never see. This celebration, the small celebration thing, it is not something I ever did. I never celebrated small wins. I dismissed my small wins because that's what's expected. The psychological reasons for why this happened are a different issue, and yeah, I won't get into it. But that's the way it was. And once I changed the way I treat myself and the way I see myself, I noticed that I started appreciating others people's values, whereas before I would just put them down. And I noticed this as well in other people, the way they treat me. I see the way they treat themselves. If they're very dismissive of others, they would also be very dismissive of themselves and very self-destructive.
Yeah.
But you also see the opposite, like somebody who doesn't put you down and then elevates you. They kind of do the same thing for themselves. So we kind of project our own uh, way of treating people, or we project the way we treat ourselves onto the way we treat other people. This
Yeah.
is my belief in a large part. So
And that applies to so many other things besides just work. Just
yeah.
in your relationships with other people, that is important to be the positive output
Mhm.
than to just tear down something. Because it's nice to be petty. It feels
Mhm.
good to be petty, but
Mhm.
it is also the quickest route to being a destructive person.
Yeah. And although maybe it's not obvious, but if you're petty to someone else, you're probably psychologically petty to yourself. And long term, that's just not a good thing for you.
Exactly.
Um, and yeah, well, I think we're kind of close to our end here, and it's very suitable because the last topic is know when to stop.
Oh,
So
nice.
we'll go a little bit into how do you know when to stop, although we touched upon it in terms of world building. And well, then we'll stop this podcast. But if you want to elaborate a little bit
Yeah.
more on the world building,
Immediately
Sev?
stop. Well, it's like I said, you don't stop. You always have to have it in your mind to it's just a list of priorities. Well, sometimes the world building is top priority, and you do a little bit of writing, even sometimes just exercise writing, like, oh, this is how the voice of my character, this is how the description of the world. But it's that just for you to flex your writing muscle. But the main priority is world building. But as the time goes on, the world building priority diminishes and the writing priority grows. And instead of making writing exercises, you're actually writing your first draft and your first
Hmm.
chapter and your first edit. And by then, it's not that the world building stops. Like I said, you just revisit it when you need to. These are plates that you need to balance, and you need to be the one to realize what time is to do what.
Hmm. Very well. I'd like to add a little bit, refer to our previous podcast, and that is to decide beforehand, like an exit strategy,
Oh
right?
yeah.
This can be applied to anything, but it doesn't have to be something set in stone. But you have, oh man, I'm not used to speaking so long. This COVID.
You're talking about, yeah, I was talking about when to stop doing a phase. You're talking about stopping the whole project. When the project is over.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is an example, but it can apply to anything, right? The
Yeah.
important thing is that before you start something, you decide, at this point, I'll review it or I'll stop it. And
Mhm.
same for world building. Like I know in your case you didn't do it, like you didn't decide when to stop before you
But
started
I
it.
did decide when to
But
stop writing the book. And that's something I will
okay,
probably go on further. But you go on with what
yeah,
you're saying.
yeah. So like you just need to have an idea, and going back to repeating the same words is just like a plan is not set in stone. You review it. So you say, next week I'm gonna stop no matter what, and then you reach that point and you got to change. Oh well, things changed. It wasn't very realistic, and you have to adjust it. But it's the same thing, honestly. And yeah, that's all for me.
Knowing when to stop an art project is very difficult because in terms of painting, you could paint forever.
Mm.
There's always another detail, there's always another highlight, there's always something that you can perfect. So there was this saying that when your art is done when all you're doing is fidgeting. Basically,
Mm.
when you're in terms of writing, all you're doing is fixing commas and periods and just syntax. When you're all you're doing is basically just shifting around the organization of the words, just so it looks a little bit
Mm.
better or more eloquent. That's when you should say, you
Mm.
know what, I wrote 600 pages. It's good enough. And
Yeah.
that's very hard for an artist, because that's always what you're going to get. You're always going to get it's good enough, because it can be
Mm.
better. Obviously, anything can always be better, artistically speaking.
Mhm.
But it's, for me, having a deadline helps a lot, because I was
Mm.
spending a lot of money editing my book, and I
Oh.
needed to get some return. Like, I need to have a return on my investment. So I said, okay, I can't keep going. I really just can't keep editing the book. So
Mm.
by November, I had to have my final draft. December, I had to start working on marketing, and by January, it needed to
Mm.
be out. And
Right.
that was my mathematical approach to the problem, is that I literally could not continue doing what I was doing. So that was my end goal. Ideally,
Right.
you want to be better than that. You don't want to finish something out of necessity, although
Right.
it is a good way, it is a good stopping point when you have to stop, because otherwise everything goes to the trash. So you have to
Mhm.
stop there, is a good motivator. But ideally, what you really want is to have the self-discipline to go like, okay, I'm just fidgeting around now. I'm going to stop. It's over.
Yes. Very well.
How to do that, how to
And
get to that point, is you got to be comfortable with yourself. You have to trial and error, I say.
yes, that is very good. Trial and error, and you just readjust,
Yeah,
reevaluate.
exactly.
And this will be almost the end of our podcast. So we'll just ask you a few questions. Would you like to kick it off, Seb?
I know you appreciate today's episode, otherwise you wouldn't be listening, but be sure to subscribe for more. It's the first thing I want to say. But on the question of engagement, the call to action button thing that you wrote on the document that I need to read.
Oh, you don't need to tell them all the meta.
Oh, sorry. But the question, I'm actually kind of curious to hear what you guys have to say about what's your approach to world building and discipline. What is the life hack that you discovered that helps you? Because I still want to improve upon the way I'm doing shit. So please, anyone tell me what is it they do?
Right.
What do you do?
Right. We're not experts yet,
No.
but we'll get there. We'll get there. And again, we'll try to have one or two podcasts a month in the beginning. Stay tuned. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify initially, and we'll also plug in some social media and other links that we mentioned in this video in the description below. I am Jay, and this is Artistry Podcast signing off.
And I'm Sav.
See ya.
See ya.